Welcome to Relationship Mastery, a podcast for those who want to learn how to master the art of creating happy, healthy, and loving relationships. Please join me, Adey-Jones, and my co-host, Barry Selby, each Tuesday at 1 p.m. Pacific for a lively and informative conversation on everything to do with relationships. Welcome, everybody. Thank you so much for joining us. I've got the lovely Barry here with me today, and we thought that we would talk about, as it was Father's Day this week, last Sunday, we thought we would talk about our fathers and the legacy that our fathers left with us.
Oh, yes, this would be a fun topic to talk about for sure.
It's going to be a good one. It's going to be very different. Barry and I, as you've probably gathered by now, if you've listened to our other episodes, had very different experiences with our fathers. And I'm going to go first a little bit because
Sure.
Father's Day every year, it's a very painful day for me, to be completely honest. I don't normally realize it until the day. All of a sudden, I see all these things popping up on. Even though I'm a mother of two sons, I am divorced from my ex-husband. So Father's Day is the day that he gets to have my beautiful boys. But for me, it's a day where I open my computer and I see all these wonderful things being said about fathers by these daughters mostly, I think, in my situation, in my friend group. And it really brings up a very sort of poignant feeling in me.
Mm-hmm.
And what I noticed this year was I anticipated it. It wasn't just so much on the day that I went, oh, it's Father's Day. I could feel that feeling coming up a few days before. And there was just a sort of, I really sort of mulled it over. I thought, gosh, at 64, I'm still, and after all the work I've done over these years, certainly for the last 40 years around this, it has softened for sure, but it's still there. There's still that residue, it's still there. And so much so that I started thinking about how many other, and I'll just talk about women for right now, because I think it's a wonderful opportunity for Barry, you to talk about the legacy your father left you as a male. And so from my perspective, I'm just going to talk about what my father's legacy left for me as a female.
Mm-hmm.
And so for me, that hole that it left in my heart, not having a father, because in my situation, being a heterosexual female, my father would have been my first love. And having a father that was absent and not there to reflect that I was this beautiful, wonderful, lovely little girl that deserved, worshipping and adoring and loving, definitely had an effect on me, how I felt about myself, how I showed up in the world. And I know that my situation was like a complete abandonment situation, but there are so many other women out there, a lot of my clients that their fathers were present, but they still felt that abandonment, or they felt that abuse, or that neglect, or whatever it was. So it just had me thinking about how many women out there today feel the same way I do. This sort of sadness that we cannot post photographs of our fathers and wax lyrically about how wonderful and adoring and incredible they are, and how much we miss them, even if they're in heaven or whatever it is. So I'm actually going to be doing a workshop next week. It's going to just be a 1-hour workshop, but it's going to be on healing that father wound. So I thought it would be wonderful to start talking about it here with you, Barry. So
there we go.
Before we go a little deeper into what some of those wounds are for women in particular, let me hear about your experience and what Father's Day brings up for you.
Certainly. Well, first of all, regarding Father's Day, in America, it is a few months after Father's Day in England, just to be transparent. Father's Day in England is in March. So there's a shift of time. So even though I do claim Father's Day because I live in the States, I know it's not accurate based on where I grew up, for whatever that's worth. Not much, I'm sure. However, the thing about, and I'll say for me as an example of a boy being raised by his father, for other boys being raised by their fathers as well, is that, like you were saying, for women, for girls, it was kind of their first love. For us, it was our role model more than anything else. It was the demonstration of how to be, in quotes, a man. Now, I said before on this book, on our show, I was born and raised Jewish, so I was supposed to be a man at age 13 because when I was bar mitzvahed, it's like then you go from boyhood to manhood, and I was like clueless of like what the hell that meant. But at the same time, I would look at my dad, and I don't think it's just me doing this. I'm sure other boys did the same thing. I'd compare him to other dads, my friends' dads. And to be transparent, my dad wasn't the coolest one. And I was very clear about that. So even though I knew there's a role model piece in there, I was almost jonesing for somebody else's dad to be a better role model for me than him.
In what
That was
way?
because he wasn't the strongest, he wasn't the most dynamic, he wasn't the most playful, he wasn't the most. I mean, he definitely wasn't the most emotive, and that was definitely part of my opportunities for growth, for sure. But other fathers like would play sports with their sons. My dad never did that. He wasn't very athletic, and I didn't do much with him either because of that. Things like he took them, he would take their son, they would take their sons out, maybe take them out driving earlier than my dad did. So like little things where I felt like I was being left behind in some ways. And again, this is just purely relationship with father. And the biggest one, looking back in hindsight, for me now, is my father never showed me how to be emotionally integrated as a man because he didn't demonstrate that. So I had to find my own way in later life to discover that being a man did not mean I could have did not mean I could not have emotions, but it also meant how I could be healthy with that. So a lot of things I didn't get from my dad. And again, that was for the role model type because that's really what it was for us, for boys. The father is the role model, more than anything else. And of course, the other part, which we'll both talk about, is how my dad related to my mother was the demonstration of relationship, which was part of my upbringing. And for many people, that was, whether it was a good one or bad one or non existent one, that was the sort of thing I took on as well.
Mm. Yeah, it's fascinating. God, I could go so deep with this. I love
I
it.
know.
I love this conversation. Um, as you were talking, I was thinking about, I was actually thinking about my younger brother, because
Hmm.
he also did not have a father. I mean, none of the children that my mother had with my father had a father. There was two girls and a boy, and it's incredible. We all felt very differently. My older sister was angry with him and didn't think he deserved us, whereas I yearned for him. I had this sort of longing that life would have been better if he had been in our lives. And for my
Hmm.
younger brother, it is as much as he was absent, he also left a legacy. My younger brother became an incredible husband, an incredible father, and still is,
Hmm.
because of what he learned from having a father like the father we had, a father that was absent, unavailable, and cruel, to be truthful, to live only a couple of miles down the road and not acknowledge his children took a level of cruelty or what's another word? Oblivion is another one that comes up. But to just not even be aware of the impact that that would have on your children.
Right.
So it's so interesting. And I remember when I actually did reach out to my father when I was turning 30. It was I was quite crazy during my 20s. Not that I haven't been crazy through my 30s, 40s, 50s as well, and 60s. I'm apparently so. But I really didn't want to turn 30 not meeting this man that I said walked into every relationship I ever had, even if I'd never exchanged a single word with him. His
Yeah.
legacy, his impact on me affected all my relationships. And so I was determined to at least meet him and see if that would change anything. And it certainly did. I mean, I wasn't angry. It wasn't profound. We didn't maintain a relationship. It was a brief meeting, but there was something inside me that sort of pulled out the festering claw that was creating this wound in me.
Yeah.
I felt something being pulled out, um, and it was very important for me. And again, I just want to stress that it doesn't matter if your father is being present or not; they still impact you.
Hmm.
Because we are led to believe that, through fairy tales or whatever it is, that, certainly for me, I had the fantasy that every father must adore their child. I mean, or their little girl especially, that was a given. So
Go
if
for it.
my father, for whatever reason, couldn't be present in my life, as small children do, they make it all about you. I was like, oh my God, there's something wrong with me. I
Right.
mean, because if he can't love me, it's because I'm not good enough, pretty enough, clever enough, or any of the other enoughs that I could come up with
Mhm.
to
Right.
have him want to claim me as his child. And but again, as I say, I'm very aware that this is not just for children that have been completely abandoned by their fathers. It can be a, a little girl can feel that way even when the father is present in their house.
Right. And the thing is, like I was saying with my father, and probably for many fathers, most men in general, to be emotionally expressive wasn't very easy. So I'm sure for daughters, that was a missing piece that they wish they had from their fathers. So the idea of what you said about that absent though present type experience with their father was definitely quite frequent with many women, independent of nationality. I know obviously we both come from Great Britain, but I'm sure in America there's a very similar thing. And so the paradigm that we're from, or the experience we come from, is definitely one where we had our fathers in a certain position in our um, description of our lives. Like how we had life was because of the impression, the imprint, the modeling that our father gave us. Again, whether present or absent, that was given to us that we then took on. And to speak from the male point of view, I vividly remember I vividly remember not having, yeah, I guess that's the way to say it. I vividly remember there were no times that I had intimacy of any sort with my father.
Mm.
A sense of comfort, of safety, of communication, of emotional vulnerability, all those things that I didn't realize I was craving. Because part of it also, because again, I'm modeling him, is that his in quotes toughness, because he wasn't emotionally expressive, was something that basically I modeled as well. I mean, in my teens and 20s, being vulnerable, it was dangerous for me. When I did put the walls down, I got hurt. I mean, got bullied, nothing to do, literally got hurt. So I saw that what my dad presented was really the quote only way to be, to survive and to keep myself intact emotionally, so to speak. So in my early 20s, especially, I felt, and it's interesting, I felt this duality going on internally. I felt the yearning for that sort of freedom to be comfortable and emotional and everything else, but externally, somebody called me this once. I was very aloof. I had a very stoic presentation because that's the only way that I was being allowed to. I perceived I was being allowed to be in the world.
Mm.
So the male, I've talked about this before, and I've seen there's lots of talks on the world about this, about the mask that we wear as men. We had to put on a certain presentation, a certain way of being, and our fathers are a massive influence on that, whether they know it or not. So
Mm.
yeah, for both of us, both male and female, we have this amazing ability to create sometimes a distorted reality of what our fathers was like to fit the paradigm we're living in.
Mhm. Yeah, I know. Is what you just said there just struck me. Yeah, I the irony is I met my half sister a few years
Mhm.
ago. She's older than me. She's my father's first child. I'll cry if I say anything. Just an unbelievably beautiful woman who
Mhm.
has embraced me as her half sister, and learning from her that my father wasn't this, that my life would not have been better if my father had been in my life. We build this image of who we think our fathers are, and what life would be like with them, and to learn
Yeah,
that that I didn't miss out. In fact, maybe I had even dodged a bullet. you know,
maybe.
it may
Yeah,
be. So, but so I work with so many women that have issues with their fathers, and what somebody said to me a few weeks ago. We just finished a program together, and she was just sharing how different her life would have been if she had had a father who had loved and cherished her, and that she wouldn't have been into physically, not just emotionally, but physically abusive relationships, believing
hmm,
that was all she deserved. And it's so heartbreaking. And when I do meet fathers who love their daughters, and basically model for their daughters that they deserve to be loved and respected and cherished, and they move through the world knowing that that's their right, and that
yeah.
they attract men that can provide that for them. It's just so beautiful. So any men out there listening, please love your daughters. I have this John Mayer song playing in my head, the daughters song, fathers love your daughters. And it's just such a beautiful song. And, it goes on to say, mothers love your daughters too. But
Right.
it really is to be a conscious parent, to know that how we treat our children impacts how they do relationships,
Yeah.
So,
One of the biggest pieces of that, because what we both talked about in the past few minutes is that we made up, I want to say assumption is a dangerous word, but we made up perceptions of what we think our father was like, even though we didn't actually necessarily check it out or ask the questions. So one of the things I would suggest after we said about John Mayer's song and that sort of thing is men who have daughters, tell them what's really going on. Because a lot of times what happens as children, we make up stories about why our parents are doing, saying, being, both men and both fathers and mothers, because we don't get actually direct information from them. Oftentimes parents, and fathers in particular, will think that they're protecting their child by not telling them the truth, sort of thing. That wiring's in there. Yet the thing is, the children will, if we don't hear the facts of what's going on, we'll make up our own perception of what happened. And
yeah,
oftentimes it's off the mark, so we lose out. So if you are raising children, I highly encourage you to be honest with them. Not every detail, but especially when there's some tough things going on. Don't just say everything's going to be fine, which it may well be, but like, it doesn't hurt to share with them the journey going on, because we are educating the younger generation, either parents or otherwise. So as a father, which I'm not, just to be clear,
mm,
to be that communicative with your child,
yeah,
particularly your daughters and your sons too. So they have a relationship with you in a way that they have, because this is intimacy too. Communication is intimacy.
yeah.
So have that freedom is good.
Yeah. Well, as a mother, I definitely believe in age-appropriate communication. I mean, there is
Oh
things,
yes, yes, yeah.
but children sense, they know. So as you say, to deny that anything's going on, if there are challenges going on within the marriage or there's a breakup or whatever,
Mhm.
to be age appropriate with what you say to them. You
Yes.
don't have, parentify the child and dump on them, and then they have to end up taking care of the parent by any means. But I do
Thank you for
think,
clarifying
say that
that for me. Yes.
again. What was
Thank you for
that?
clarifying that for me. Yes,
Yes,
absolutely, I agree.
yes. But the other thing is, because as again, I work an awful lot with, as well as the sort of general relationship coaching, I do a lot with codependency and narcissistic abuse, and a lot of the it seems that most of my clients, not all of them by any means, I have a lot of male clients too that have maybe issues with their parents growing up who are narcissists, or even are divorced from a narcissist. But I would say the majority are women that I work with who have a narcissistic ex, and they often are afraid of how much time the children will spend with that narcissistic ex, and they're saying things like, but I want to protect my child, I don't want my child to have anything to do with him. And I have to encourage them to allow, unless that father is absolutely abusive, and you sort of limit contact or have it be in a safe space, maybe it's in a therapist's office or something like that. But I do encourage that, it is better that a child, especially a girl, because I can only talk about it from the girl's perspective,
Indeed.
to know who your father is. When
Hmm.
you deny that child access, that little girl access to their fathers, they will create the fantasy. And that
Yes.
father will be, a fairy tale, and he's going to be the father that was denied to her, or the father that would have made her life better if he'd been in it. And, as it was in my case, I had a complete fictitious version of who my father was because I didn't have access to him, or he didn't want access, and it wasn't
Hmm.
encouraged by my mother. But I think it's so important. Children will know. They will know when something isn't right. They will know when their parent maybe is behaving in a narcissistic manner. But let them find out for themselves. Don't tell them your father is a narcissist. Um, you can just say something like, well, sometimes your father has a hard time communicating in a healthy way, or something like that. So very neutral. Um, but definitely, again, I know we've talked about this when we did the parenting, healthy parenting, that children do
Yeah.
think that they're half of their mother and half of their father. So if you say something really overtly negative about the father, then the child
Hmm.
will interpret that there's something about them that you don't like either. So we have to be really mindful with our words. But again, as you
Absolutely.
said, truthful to the point where we can ignore, I mean, I think I mentioned to you before, or to our listeners and to you, Barry, that my mother used to say, oh, your father loves you, he just can't be with us. Well, that messed me up so badly, because it was like, is this what love looks like? That you only come and see my mother late at night when I'm asleep, and I never actually get to even see you or talk to you. So that really messed my wiring up as far as what
Hmm.
love was. And all I
Yeah.
knew was I had this longing. I longed to see my father. I longed to have him speak to me, or whatever. And I carried that mixed message inside of myself. Unless I was longing for somebody, I didn't think I loved them. There had to be
Yeah.
that component of yearning, longing. So what did I do? I chose unavailable men so I could get that high, that feeling that I called love. So yes,
Hmm.
these mothers out there, love your daughters too, as John Mayer says, and be aware of that, just that your children are picking up everything. And
Yeah.
if you're having issues in your relationship with the child, the father of your child, for your child's sake, work on that relationship, heal it. As even doesn't mean you have to stay together, but just even if you're separate, to just be separated in a healthy, loving way.
This is the thing, and we talked about this before. The way we love as adults oftentimes is very much influenced and imprinted by the way we were loved when we were kids. So this piece you've been saying, I just want to underscore it and really, really anchor that point for people who are listening who may not have thought about this before, because we definitely have, is that we don't realize sometimes that the way we connect and attract relationships, like you were saying about unavailable men, wasn't something you were choosing intentionally, consciously. That was something that you learnt, in quotes,
Mm-hmm.
unconsciously or invisibly, so to speak, from your father and the way he was. We as men, I suspect, I believe, oftentimes learn to or emulate or I want to say copy is too strong a word, but we tend to do the same behavior because that's the way, again, we learn by watching the legacy of our parents, our fathers and our mothers, how we date, how we relate, how we have relationships. And it's amazing how people don't get this. And just to be transparent, I've been talking about this to different people. They're like, "Oh, I never realized that." It's like, of course,
Mm-hmm.
because we don't learn. This is something we don't learn in high school or in books necessarily. We observe by watching unconsciously the way our parents. We look at our parents as kids and go, "Oh, that's how it is. That's how love is supposed to be." And so we have this unconscious programming, for want of a better word, that drives our choices in both what we attract and also how we are in a relationship. I know from my early dating life that, as I mentioned, the stoicness and the being the aloofness really messed up my love life. I mean, it was like women hated the fact, or girls I was out with hated the fact I wasn't really invested, apparently, emotionally with them.
Mm-hmm.
I didn't know how to because I didn't have that education as a kid. So definitely, from speaking both sides of this conversation, we have had our missteps in relationships based upon the influences we had from our fathers. And now, again, no, just to be clear, that wasn't intentionally by them doing it to us. We learned it by observation, by witnessing, by just being present to them. So, for those people listening and watching, men or women, just be aware that you may, in fact, be making dating choices the same way. That you may, in fact, have made your choices and your marriage choices even because of the way you were raised by one of your parents or both your parents. If that's working for you, great. Because the key caveat, because some relationships are amazing because their parents were amazing, and but most of us unfortunately had stuff to work on. So just know if that's the case, first of all, either one of us can help you. But secondly, it's not the end of the world.
Mm-hmm.
This is something that if you're aware of something, oh my god, this is different now. You can now do something different. You can, because awareness is first step, and now you can say, okay, I realize now that I've been making choices without realizing it. I can choose consciously now,
Yeah.
and that's
No,
victory
exactly.
right there.
Like I was saying with my younger brother, he consciously chose to absolutely
Yeah,
not emulate or be the type of man that our father was. And he
exactly.
did a beautiful job at being a very, very present, loving, um, doting husband and father to his children. So yeah, it's not always, if you had a difficult childhood, or rather, you had a father. In this case, we're talking fathers after Father's Day, so we're talking about fathers. But if you had a father that um, was, I always say, we're all doing the best we can, all of us,
Yeah,
including our parents. And just because our fathers may have been doing the best they could, doesn't always mean it was good enough. That's my thing. You know,
that's true. Yeah,
it
yeah,
really is. So we can say that, we can let go of any sort of resentment and anger, knowing that they did the best they can, but we can also acknowledge that, it was wounding and it was
yeah.
painful, and it
Hmm.
was, maybe I shouldn't even say the word ideal, because I absolutely believe that everything that we go through in life is for our highest good, and I certainly have no regrets. I don't want to go back and have a different childhood by any means. I
Right.
love where I am today, knowing what I know. So I'm grateful for the childhood I had. Um,
Yes.
but again, it's that just acknowledging that if it hurt, you have every right to those feelings. If you feel, if sadness is there, it's okay to have sadness. Don't judge it. Like, even when, as I said, leading up to Father's Day, there could have been a little judgment of like, oh, come on now,
Mhm.
really 64 and you're still getting that little pang. But it's just a tenderness. It's just that little beautiful soft spot that still exists within me that I can be with and be very gentle and loving with, and aware of. So
Yeah.
yeah,
Well, there's one thing I want to add on to this, just as a thought provocation, maybe, because the thing is, what we're talking about here is that we get to change the paradigm because we now become aware of what happened. This is the thing. If we really are looking through this lens clearly, we'll recognize the fact that our father's way of learning to be the way he was probably influenced by their parent, their father before them, or their mother before them, their parents before them. And the truth is, these behavioral styles, approaches to life, the ways of loving, were inherited from generation after generation after generation. So what we are doing is, in some ways, we're breaking cycles of hereditary programming that we didn't know we were carrying. So this is, in some ways, a magnificent opportunity to change the course of history, so to speak, for our whole lineage. So this is not just, oh, my dad screwed us up, therefore we need to fix it. And yes, it is that, but also to recognize the fact that it's something more than that.
yeah,
That you want to be really conscious of this whole conversation, but more spatially aware. This is something big that we're playing with here in a good way. And the truth is that our father's legacy really is grandfathers, great grandfathers, etc., that we're now choosing to say, you know what, we can change this.
yeah.
And that's the gift we have.
Mm. No, that's beautiful, and that's so true. And it really is. It's um, I mean, all we can hope for is that we do a slightly better job than our parents did, and and
Yes,
and
absolutely.
generations we are a little more conscious, a little more aware, not so much on automatic pilot or rote, or well, this is just the way it is. I remember somebody saying to me once, well, I just parent instinctively, and that to me, it's like whoa. there's instinct, and there's that generational sort of imprint that may not
Programming.
necessarily be a good instinctual way to parent. It's
Agreed.
being able to step back, and our next show is going to be on wisdom, intuition, that inner guidance, not just parenting from that place, but being in relationship from that place. So as much as I am 100% tap into your wisdom, your intuition, and get your guidance from there, not from the small mind, as we say. Um, but also be very, very cognizant of, of what's um, a habitual pattern that may not be healthy compared
Yeah.
to wisdom speaking through you and guiding you.
Oftentimes it's the convenience and the ease of that autopilot versus the, oh, I have to think about this now and actually act consciously. But the truth is, that's where the real joy is, the real freedom is, and the real fulfillment is. So yes, it's worth choosing out of the default and asking questions, thinking, how can I do this differently and better?
Yeah,
And stay into the intuition, absolutely.
absolutely. And I will say one thing. I want to end this on this. If that
Hmm.
intuition is if the feeling behind that intuitive response to parent comes from a place of love, then trust it. If it
Yeah.
comes from a place of being punitive or wanting to teach a lesson, ignore it. That's habitual. That's not your wisdom. Wisdom does not tell you to be cruel or to be punishing. It's on the energy of love. So I think that's a very important note to end on.
I
But we will,
absolutely agree with you. Yes.
yeah. So thank you again. That was a deep one for me, and I hope that any of the women out there that are listening to this, please tune in next. Gosh, what day is it going to be? It's going to be July
Episode.
1st. I will be doing a Healing the Father Wound workshop, and I would love you all to join me. I will. You can find me on Adey-Jones.com, and you can find the link there to register. And maybe I can put it in the show notes.
Ooh.
Okay, well, thank you again, everybody, and look forward to seeing you all again next week.
Thanks, everybody. We'll see you again soon. We trust you enjoyed this episode and invite you to share this with your friends and loved ones. In fact, please subscribe to our Relationship Mastery podcast. That way you'll get each new episode fresh and shiny as soon as it is released. We'd love to hear from you as well, so go ahead and enter your questions and comments at relationshipmastery.show. Take good care. We will connect with you in our next episode of Relationship Mastery.